Okay, here we go. Okay, so welcome. This is my webinar, Parenting the SAT and ACT Test Taker. My name is Lydia Terry. I am the designer of the cognitive agency approach with Ampersand Prep. I've been doing this for about 10 years now. My background is not an educator. I'm a real estate appraiser, and I moved several years ago to a new area, and my fiance at the time, I moved to Rochester, Minnesota, and he was getting his postdoc at the Mayo Clinic. They don't pay them very much. So he was also working part-time at a tutoring center. And he said, until I found another appraisal job, to apply to work there. So he did, and I got an almost perfect score on the ACT without even trying. And that was weird to me. I didn't expect that because it'd been so long. Usually when you haven't done it for a while, it's weird. What I realized at that time is that real estate appraisal does applied. That's one of the jobs where we actually do things like geometry in the real world. I actually do statistics, y equals mx plus b. If my reports have grammatical errors, I get kicked back from lawyers and I get argued with. Even if my value is right, if I didn't use my commas correctly, they'll argue with me. So it's just this weird profession that made me uniquely able to talk about the SAT and the ACT in a very practical, pragmatic, and applied way. And I found that I was very good at this. And it's my opinion, my professional opinion, that the SAT and the ACT, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot today, are trying to weed out students who memorize because they're trying to get a good grade versus students who understand why they learned what they learned. The SAT and the ACT really are very good at weeding that out. And that's a big reason we get the phenomenon of high GPA versus and low test score. Okay. This is a question that I ask, I'm going to be hiring a tutor here soon because business is picking up. I got to hire a tutor. And this is a question I am going to be asking a tutor, and I want to kind of talk about why that is. A student answers that October is the 8th month instead of the 10th month. What do you do? So a lot of times when I talk to tutors, they'll say, oh, you just make them memorize months some more. But there is a question on the ACT where they're talking about October, and this is the distractor answer. And I want to hire someone who would say, it makes sense that you would think October is the 8th month because of oct. I've made that mistake before. And because of the way the Roman emperors, they added July and August, Julius Augustus into the calendar, which is why the prefixes on the months don't actually correlate to numbers. I want that to be the sort of thing explained to a student. I've had a lot of students miss that October versus 10th month is the 8th month question who absolutely know that October is the 10th month. It's just under pressure. And the way the question was asked, they'll make this kind of mistake. Happens all the time. And so what I don't want is another tutor who talks down to a student instead of speaks empathetically about why a misunderstanding occurred. Okay. Do you make a worksheet that drills the month, or do you teach them why July and August was added to the 10th month? This is the kind of tutor I would want to hire. I don't believe that tutors should be a student's bully, and a lot of tutors are. Okay, the SAT and ACT are stressful, but they can open up so many doors to students and can place outsized amount of concern on parents of students. And these are the top questions I get, and I just want to alleviate concerns with information. So the stress is valid, but the best thing I can do to reduce the stress is just give as much information as I can. Okay, so the number one question I get all the time is, why is my student getting good grades, but their score isn't correlating? There are two reasons for this. One, this is by design. Okay, if the SAT and the ACT scores correlated with GPAs, they would be meaningless. We have GPAs already, so we need the scores to do something different. Okay, and so they purposely they will literally write questions to get a student who maybe understands the academic content to get it wrong. They bait assumptions constantly. They're using counterintuitive methods all the time. The right answer seems wrong and the wrong answer seems right. They do this constantly. They're extremely good at it. I'm oftentimes amazed. Every time a new test comes out, we oftentimes get tests after they've been taken. Like, for example, the ACT is this morning. In about 3 months from now, I would say 3 weeks from now, we're all going to get to see that test. So I go through every test my students, every test I get my hands on, I will take it myself. They're so good at baiting assumptions. This is by design. This is how they gain relevancy. This is how they work. This is how schools need straight A students to rank themselves. And so they use the SAT and the ACT to do that. The second reason is a little bit more high-minded, is schools want to know if a student practically understands the topic and didn't just memorize it. If you have memorized equations without understanding them, you're going to struggle significantly on the ACT and the SAT versus if you understand them. And semicolons, colons, stuff like that. A lot of parents will ask me what a good score is, and you're going to hear me say this so much. It depends. It depends. A college ready score for the SAT is 10-10 and 21-22 for the ACT. Everything above that is going to be something that you're going to want to, the higher you go, the more merit scholarships and collegiate opportunities will be available to you. So good is relative for each situation. I have a student right now who's trying to get a 36 and she has a 33 and she feels that that's bad. I have other students that have worked really hard to try to get a 27 because the 27 is going to mean a certain scholarship for them. If they could if they couldn't even dream of having a 32, it's all relative to the student and their goals. Above, of course, a 21-22 or a 10-10. What about the PSAT? So the PSAT is part of the SAT testing suite. That's considered the preliminary SAT. I think that's what the P stands for. The words, the acronym has stopped meaning things a long time ago. They don't even like share where their acronyms are anymore. It used to be aptitude test, then it was academic test. Now they don't even admit to what they think they are anymore. But the PSAT should be a good approximation of the SAT score if nothing changes. So if you get a 1200 on the PSAT, you're likely to get a 1200 should you do nothing different. Okay, that's important to remember. If you do nothing different, that's probably what's going to happen. I don't know where to put me. I'm trying to move me around here. Okay. They are on a slightly different scale. That's to account for the fact that you are going to learn more. So it's not exactly one-to-one. If you get a perfect score on the PSAT, you're very likely to get a perfect score on the 1600, even though those are different numbers. But for the most part, your PSAT score is going to be a good indication of your SAT score. I would tell parents it's usually plus or minus 25 to 50 points. Keep that in mind. Plus or minus 25 to 50 points. So if you want to use the PSAT to indicate what you're going to get on the SAT, you just assume you're not changing anything. So if your PSAT meets your goals, then you're probably fine. If the PSAT score is too low, you want a higher score, you should probably consider test prep. Okay. And if you're going to be taking the ACT, just check with the concordance tables. And if that score is going to meet your goals, then you're probably fine on the ACT as well. If not, you need to engage in test prep. What about test optional? So this is a rather big boondoggle that I deal with every day. All the other tutors deal with it every day. And there's this conception about the SAT and the ACT that they aren't fair. And I understand that perception. I oftentimes think that as well. But the truth is the SAT and the ACT are ways to demonstrate ability, even if you don't have the socioeconomic background or you didn't go to a good high school. Anyone out there can study enough for the SAT to get a score. And a lot of people who had no opportunities have been able to self-study the SAT and the ACT, get a high score, and then be given opportunities. It's a wonderful scholarship vehicle. That being said, the higher your socioeconomic class, on average, your score is going to be higher. So it's one of those things, like If you're middle to upper class and you've got white educated parents, you're probably going to have a higher score, but that doesn't guarantee a higher score. So it's kind of like all statistics, it's a boondoggle. You have to think about it critically. The SAT says they're not sexist and racist and classist, even though, again, if you're white, male, and higher income and have educated parents, on average, you get a higher score. They say their test exposes systemic inequality, and this is an evidence of systemic inequality. Very intelligent minds can agree or disagree with that. The thing is that a lot of people in a well-intentioned effort to make things more fair have argued that they should be gone away with. Even if these arguments against the SAT are correct, I don't agree with that because it should not have happened after the pandemic. We shouldn't change things after such a big situation, such a big, what would I call that? Disruptor. We should have waited. If they was going to change the SAT and the ACT, we should have waited 5 years after the pandemic so we could have really seen the effects. If people aren't taking, for example, we've seen ACT scores drop since the pandemic. Is that because of the pandemic or is it because we went test optional? How would anyone know for sure? I wish we wouldn't have made that change. However, it is what it is, and there was a lot of social pressure to make the change, so a lot of schools have gone test optional. But this has proven to be short-sighted. We're starting to see, in fact, since I made this about a week and a half ago, we've had Dartmouth has recently reversed course, and they are requiring the SAT. MIT is also requiring the SAT. What we found is that the people who are benefiting the most from test optional are not the people it was purported to help. We are finding that test optional has been helping athletes and children of rich people. People who is not helping the intelligent kid who didn't have access to a tutor. That's what we found. Of course, there's going to be individual stories that challenge that, but for the most part, the people who are benefiting from test optional or people who couldn't get a high score, but the school wanted them anyway, which of course are legacy wealthy students and athletes. I think they should all go to college. I'm not against them going to college. I'm just saying this a lot of well-intentioned things. This does seem to have backfired. That being said, I think every situation is, of course, it depends. And I encourage everyone all my students to understand, every parent who talks to me, that to look at the SAT as a way to show that a GPA is not a fluke. We have, ever since the pandemic, we have seen we have seen grade inflation. Grade inflation has been a problem for a long time, but at this point, grade inflation is out of control. An A no longer means the top % of a class. An A means you completed all the work. Well, even in that, it's not even that. A lot of times you just get A's, like basically participation trophies. And there are students who work hard for their A's, and there are students who do not. And we are failing our students in that way. It's a big problem. I'm not entirely sure how the education community is going to address this, but I will tell parents, your student is going to compete against so many other students with the same GPA. If you include, because the test is optional in a lot of schools, if you include an SAT of a score with 1100 or more, that's going to show the school that they can do the rigor. So I always tell parents, because test optional, then the SAT is going to be even a better benefit to your student. And I know, consider the source, I'm an SAT tutor, but I personally cheered this when I first heard it, and a couple of years have gone by and I no longer cheer it. This has probably not been for the best. This is Jeremiah Quinlan, the Yale Dean of Admissions, explaining that his research has showed that the test is predictive of Yale performance above and beyond high school GPA. This is Stuart Schmill, the MIT Dean of Admissions, and like I said, MIT has actually reinstated the SAT, basically saying the same thing. Our research has shown that in most cases, we cannot reliably predict students will do well at MIT unless we consider standardized test results alongside grades. Emory doesn't trust GPA. we are not as trusting, frankly, of GPA these days. Students are trying their hardest, but grades are definitely inflated and not as connected to true class performance as they used to be. So that being said, which test should my students study for? Like, say it with me. It depends. There are 4 main questions I ask when I want to determine if a student should take the SAT or the ACT. First off, just take a practice test. If you need a practice test, I can provide you one. The SAT ones are on the internet. You can find them, but I can provide an ACT test for you if you want. And then just take the test and check the concordance tables. Whichever one breaks out to be the higher one after you check the concordance table is probably the best one to take. If they're about the same, then we want to look at these other questions. Second one is, which one is a greater concern, timing or question difficulty? The SAT tends to have harder questions, but you have a little bit more time per question. And the ACT has easier questions, but it's a faster test. You have significantly less time per question. So do you find the questions to be the more challenging part, or do you find the timing to be more challenging part? That's an important consideration. So if timing is more of a challenge, then the SAT is probably a better choice. If question difficulty is more of a challenge, then the ACT is probably a better choice. It depends. Which do you understand more intuitively, geometry or algebra? I'm not talking about grades here because grading doesn't actually mean what we think it means. What I mean is you understand more intuitively. Like, this is the thing I ask my students all the time. When you think about geometry, does it make sense in your brain or do you pull back from formulas? Algebra, does it make sense in your brain or are you pulling from formulas? The one that you understand more intuitively is going to indicate which test you're going to find to be easier. There's more geometry and trigonometry on the ACT, significantly more geometry and trigonometry on the ACT, and there's quite a bit of algebra and algebra 2 on the SAT. The SAT has only a few geometry questions, sometimes only one trig question. And then the SAT has only a few parabola questions, which is strongly algebra 2. So that being said, that's always a consideration I ask. The last one is that the ACT does have a science score and the SAT science is quite easy to get a perfect. I'm not going to say it's easy to get a perfect score on, but a lot of my students, it's the easiest to get a perfect score on. The 36 on the science test is the easiest to tutor to. And so if you want to be flashy, again, this is the 4th consideration. A lot of my students will say, okay, all things being equal, I want to go into science. I'm going to take the ACT because we have a science score. I want to show off a high science score. Okay. Again, that is the last consideration I ask for, but these are the 4 considerations I take into account. That being said, each situation is different. I recently took a student through, we went through all 4 of these and we decided on the ACT, but then he had a conversation with everyone. He's like, I've thought about it and I've taken both tests. I just think the SAT is the right choice. And I don't remember exactly what his situation was that made it slightly different. But again, these are just starting questions I ask. But each situation is different. I think what he finally told me and his dad was, I felt more comfortable in the SAT. And if a student says that, I mean, obviously that's going to trump everything else. His concordance scores were pretty much the same. He felt pretty strong with, I don't remember which of the question that went ACT, but then after talking to everyone, he's like, but I just like the SAT better. If the student says that to me, I'm going to go with that test. So he actually went that direction. This is a service I offer for free. Parents trying to figure this out, we can set an appointment up. I offer this for free. I want you to, even if you don't end up working with me and you end up self-studying, I want you to self-study the test that you're going to do the best on. So we will work through this together. I don't think it's that deep. Honestly, like I tell students, once you've taken 1 or 2 practice tests and actually applied the review process to it, it's probably not worth it to switch. Just pick one test and stick with it. They're not that deep. It's really not that deep. So it's deep enough to ask these 4 questions, but it's probably not deep enough to like switch halfway through. So once you pick one, stick to it. Have I had a few students change? Sure. But most of the time, just sticking to one is going to be the best choice. Mom, I already walked through this all. Okay. How should my child self-study for the SAT and ACT? Okay. So this is, of course, if they're not going to be doing tutoring. You want to remember there are 3 reasons a student misses a question other than timing. The first reason is They don't know the academic content. I will be honest though, this is the primary difference between the cognitive agency approach and most other tutoring programs. Most other tutoring programs review the academic content. They hand out flashcards, they give a sheet of formulas and say, here you go. There's all the formulas, the flashcards. This is what a semicolon is. And they have the kid go on their way. That's probably not why your student's missing. If a student is maybe around 1,000 on the SAT, they probably do need to learn some academic content. Maybe they didn't really absorb geometry or algebra or something like that, and we need to teach them. Okay, that's likely if someone's got a score like that. But the issue is most of the time, a student who is studying for the SAT, because not every college, like a lot of state schools, junior colleges don't care about the SAT or the ACT. The SAT or ACT is needed for a school where you need to apply to go. There are schools that will just accept you if you have a college degree. I mean, a high school degree. That means that the student who cares about the SAT or ACT is a high performing college prep student by the very fact that they care about the score. You can go to schools that don't care about the score. So if a student comes to me with tutoring, they're like, I need to tutor. That's probably because they want to go to a school that requires the SAT or ACT. Because of that very reason, by this very nature, I want to say, they usually know most of the academic content. Okay, so the ambitious high school student probably knows at least 80% of the academic content. Reviews are usually a waste of time, which is why we see scorers are oftentimes, they go through a review process, they do like a weekend class, or they do a boot camp class, and their score only goes up a little bit. They remember a couple of things they missed, they get a review, and then they're sent out to the test. So yes, it is possible they're going to miss because of the academic content, but it probably isn't the case for most students seeking ACT and SAT tutoring. The second reason is they just made a mistake. They did 5 plus -8, and they got 13 instead of -3. Stuff like that. They just made a mistake. They know the academic content, they just made a mistake. The third reason is the question was counterintuitive. This is probably why you're missing. For example, this is a very common SAT question. That graph right there, if you look at it and you do not see the total cost of dollars on the y-axis, we'll see, I suppose, and on the x-axis, it's time per hours, that looks like it has a slope of 3/4. It really does. It looks like B is the right answer. If we were to get rid of the scalars, it would look like B. A lot of my students miss this problem because they don't look at the scalars. A student looks at the scalars, they will realize that is not a slope of 3/4. That is a slope of 3. So when a student misses this question, it is not because they don't know slope-intercept form. So if they were to take this on a diagnostic test, get it wrong, it would come back slope-intercept form. And then a typical tutor would handle the slope-intercept questions. That's not the issue here. If a student says B, instead of telling them, hey, you need to work on your slope-intercept form, it's going to confuse them because they're like, well, no, I don't. I get it. I'm going to say, look at the scalars. And I'm going to wait just a second. They look at the scalars. I'm like, look, for 1, there's actually 4 boxes for 1. And on this one, each box is so on the y-axis, boxes are 1-to-1 ratio. But on the y-axis, they're 4-to-1 or 1-to-1/4, depending on how you look at it. And then they go, oh, I didn't need to teach them slope-intercept form. They know slope-intercept form. Most students know slope-intercept form. But if I taught them slope-intercept form, they're still going to struggle with this question because they don't even know why they're wrong. So this is counterintuitive. It's challenging what they expected to happen. And this is the kind of work we need to do to get that high score for a student who does know slope-intercept form. In order to do this, I can't do it for them. I can tell them all day long. They need to take practice tests. They need to take, they can't pull out, it's not appropriate to pull out spreadsheets. It's not appropriate to pull out worksheets. They have to take practice tests because the practice tests they're rife with these counterintuitive questions. The student will then take the practice test, and then I'm going to show them how to review their questions, and so they can learn from each mistake. You're going to review each missed question and determine which of the 3 reasons is the reason they missed. Okay, so that's why your students are missing. And then in order to prepare for that, they have to understand that. So how do you pick a good tutor if you want to pick a tutor? Again, that October question is a good indicator that a tutor is not going to be a bully, and they're going to like actually explain the counterintuitive nature of things. Another question you could ask to pick a good tutor, what if a student thought average meant estimation? This was an example I had. I'm actually in a tutoring group where a student didn't understand average, very smart student, and the tutor was making fun of her. A lot of people, for very logical reasons, think that average means estimation, stuff like that. So what I did when I had that situation, I validated that reasoning and explained the difference between an estimation and an average. I also want to say a marker I've noticed for these bad tutors. I hate talking about other people in a negative sense, but I see it all the time. Is that these tests are so unbelievably fair. They don't acknowledge the unfair nature of them. They don't even like to admit that the questions are counterintuitive. This is the type of tutor that will give a student a worksheet on the slope-intercept form instead of explain, hey, the scalars were off. Or like make them memorize the October as the 10th month instead of explain, hey, you probably got confused by the prefix. They don't get to the why. They just do the cognitive load. They do rote work and they just throw more work at a student, which is brutal. And it doesn't work. How do I help my child if I can't remember? This is the question a parent asked me. How do I help a child if I can't remember something from high school? She's like, I don't remember this stuff. My kid, he wants to do well. How do I help him? That's a really good question. Ask them to, this is what I told her. Ask them to explain something in particular, not general. Like, can you explain the 3-4-5 triangle? Instead of, what did you learn in tutoring? And with parents who tell me this, I will actually send them, this is what we learned. This is what you should ask about. Give them space to find an answer instead of telling them an answer. This is really important. So something I do in tutoring is I wait for them to realize something on their own instead of tell them something. For some reason, that's just so much better. It's sticking in their head. Reframe things if the solution isn't immediately obvious. For example, like if the question asks for the most, ask them for the least. Just do a quick little reframing. So often, if you just reframe something, the answer appears. Encourage nuanced thinking by saying things like, on the other hand, all things considered. If this was true, then what would happen? These kinds of questions, the nuance, the it depends type logical processes are so important on the SAT and the ACT. So if you can just work on this kind of stuff, especially if you're sitting down with them, it'd be very helpful. When should my child take the SAT or ACT? Again, depends, but this is a question I get all the time. We recommend a student starts test prep as soon as practical after Algebra 2 and geometry. You really need to get through Algebra 2 and geometry. The ACT goes into pre-calculus a little bit, but I can teach that. I can teach the pre-calculus very quickly, less than a week. It's not that far. It's just basically the pre-calculus on the ACT is kind of like an overview. Like they have matrices, for example, but you need to know very little bit about matrices. They have logarithms, but you don't even need to use your calculator to solve the logarithms on the ACT. So I'm fine with that. If a student hasn't taken pre-calculus, I'm fine accepting them in my ACT program. The SAT doesn't go into pre-calculus, and so they're firmly Algebra 2. You really should get through Algebra 2. Have I taught Algebra 2 before? Yes. But I recommend that a student get through Algebra 2 before they start preparing for the SAT and the ACT. A good prep program will review the concepts learned in these classes as they are tested on the exam, not teach them again. There's a lot of prep programs out there that will literally teach them again. That might work for maybe a homeschooling student who didn't have a math teacher, maybe they're just using a book just to make sure something wasn't missed. That would work really well. Maybe some, I have a lot of students, for example, who had like their geometry teacher was a long-term sub. That's when you should look for these types of things. But as a matter of course, I would not necessarily do that. The school should have taught this stuff. The SAT tutor should be a coach, not a tutor. I mean, it should be a coach, not a remediation teacher. I can do it. They can do it. They do it all the time. We do it all the time. But I would encourage parents just to make sure that all the priorities are in line. Do that as reactive instead of proactive. It's very likely especially if you got a student with a high GPA who's taking all these courses, they don't need the review like you think they do. They need test prep. They need to practice the testing. Some tutors recommend waiting as long as possible. I don't know if that's always the best case until the last minute because they argue maturity makes a difference. I do understand that, but I have definitely gotten perfect scores out of students who were immature. Okay, like I can do it. I find that this is a thing a lot of tutors say when they don't understand the reading passage. So they like to say things like, reading is intuitive. No one really understands that's not true. Okay, that's simply not true. So I would say, yes, this is a consideration, but this is not the only consideration. Each situation is different, which is why many of my clients find my guarantee valuable. What's my guarantee? Is we don't actually have a time frame. So we'll take as long as it takes. And perhaps guarantee to continue support. A student needs to take the ACT and SAT on their own. I can't do it for them. Parents can't do them for them. So anyone who tells you they can guarantee a score is probably got some fine print going on that they're not going to pay out on. I don't understand how they can do that guarantee. But I do still offer a guarantee. My guarantee is if you don't get the score you want, then you keep coming back to tutoring. Once you're enrolled in the course, you're always enrolled in the course. Most of the time this plays out like, oh, I need a 1300, I got a 1200. Okay, we'll keep coming. But I've actually had students who in their contract, they said 1300 and then they got a 1300 and they're like, I want a 1400 now. Okay, so we have a guarantee of continued support. So once you're in my program, you will continue to be in the program. So this works really well for sophomores who maybe just want to, and we'll just maybe take one test a month that they pay at the beginning. They'll take one test a month and they'll just make sure that they're on track in their algebra 2 and geometry. And then when it gets closer to the junior year and it's time to take the test, then we get them 2 or 3 times a week instead of once or twice a month. Again, once you're in the program, you're in the program. So the reason there is no one size fits all. And so I developed a program that doesn't have one size fits all as our only product. We've been said, come with a guarantee you feel confident following through on. If a student wants to keep working on the SAT or ACT, we will keep working with them until they get the results they are satisfied with. Once enrolled in the program, a student will have access to the program until they no longer need the program. Unlike other guarantees, we always pay out. Every student of mine is guaranteed gets this. I actually have one student, I think she's like, I can't take the SAT after this, so we only have this date. So I guess that one she didn't pay out. So she's taking the test today. But if she doesn't get the score she wants to continue back, she will be welcome back. Okay, so the cognitive agency system for the high achieving student, I think that this is actually done. I think we are done there. Let me just double check to make sure I've answered all the questions that we talked about. What test? Okay, right. Good score. How to use a PC. No, it's get a good score. How to self-study. How to choose a good tutor. How to help. Okay. Yes. These are all the questions we wanted to address. Did you have any questions other than what I talked about? I'm going to go ahead and press stop. I'm going to stop recording now.